get America's perspective in this conflict. And to get us the latest, joining us now is Susan Tehrani, our correspondent from New York. Susan, thanks so much for joining us at this hour on WION. As we know, European leaders are heading to Ukraine. Macron is scheduled to visit on Monday. Germany's Olaf Scholz on February 15th. Clearly, the bigwigs are charting their own course. What is the signal for the United States?
So when it comes to Emmanuel Macron, he's really taking that French tradition of trying to strike a separate path from the United States in geopolitics as trying to make his own mark on this crisis and to defend Europe's interests. In terms of Olaf Scholz, he's been facing a lot of criticism because his country isn't doing enough. And when asked about accusations that Germany is really being a disappointment in all of this regarding latest developments, he said our allies know exactly what they have in us and claimed that Germany was indeed doing enough. A very high military contribution to NATO is what we are, despite the fact that Berlin continues to fall short of the alliance's 2% defense spending goal. And then we have Turkey, who also expressed interest in sort of tapping into this crisis and talking to Russia. What this signifies is that the United States is going to be watching these meetings very closely on the one hand to see whether or not Europe is going to be able to perhaps convince Vladimir Putin on the one hand to pull back its forces from Ukraine, which is one, very unlikely, two, whether or not it's going to continue dialogue and negotiation, that's very likely, and three, whether or not at least the Europeans will be able to convince Vladimir Putin to come to some sort of understanding, not on its principal demands, which was to not allow Ukraine into NATO and to stop defense capabilities to Ukraine, but perhaps some sort of arms control deal or something of that sort on the Eastern European border. But I think what's also interesting to note is that it sort of shows that rift between Europe and the United States when the United States really wants to impose harsh sanctions on Russia, and Europe is sort of trying to find that middle ground because it has interest in doing business with Russia at the end of the day. So yes, the United States is going to be watching that very closely, and these meetings, especially with Macron trying to really establish himself as the leader of Europe, if you may, now that Germany has a new leader, right. And Macron really finds this place for himself.
Now, Susan, just shifting our focus to the Beijing Games, facing extreme pressure from the West, notably America, it looks like Putin may have a lifeline from China, especially after the meeting between Putin and Xi. Tell us more about this and how this meeting and its outcomes are being perceived in America.
Yeah, well, it's no doubt that in Washington there's going to be concern that Vladimir Putin is going to be assured that he does have an ally in Xi Jinping and China should the United States go ahead with those quote-unquote very harsh sanctions should Russia decide to invade Ukraine or sort of pull something off in Ukraine, at least, which the United States has said that it will do. But you also have to look at history. In 2014, Putin did turn to Xi when the United States imposed sanctions after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine. What happened there was Russia turned to Ukraine and the Chinese basically, they signed a $400 billion gas deal with Russia, and the Chinese got a very good deal because they found Vladimir Putin in a bind. That might happen again. The only difference with that is China is also facing economic hardships right now after COVID, and it's not really in the best position on the one hand, and on the other hand, China's own economy might be weaker considering the fact that the International Monetary Fund downgraded China's economy again because of its zero policy COVID policies to 4.8%. But in practice, the country that will benefit from the crisis in Europe will be China, because it will that crisis will suck the diplomatic life out of the Biden administration, and it will move Russia closer to China, albeit for a short period of time. And although perhaps these two alliances might not be a match for the United States and Europe economically, because of the sanctions that China faces also on the part of the United States after the Trump administration, but still it's a cause for concern.
Right, absolutely. Susan Tehrani, our correspondent from New York, thanks so much for all those insights, and thanks for joining us on WION at this hour. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.